All right. Welcome back to another episode. We took a little bit of a breather there on stream, and for anybody that is just tuning into this series, I am going through all of the media tour questions back from October. This is back before we knew the game was delayed. We've gotten a live letter, we've gotten patch notes since then. I am filming this in the gap between Shadowbringers going offline and Endwalker coming online, so that there is something uploading that will guaranteed not have Endwalker spoilers in it, because I don't got them. And so that is what we'll be rolling out on Gaming Kinda over the first couple weeks of the expansion to help guarantee that stays spoiler free. So feel free to enjoy this, and just know that you probably, if you've been playing, have answers that I don't have. Please keep those out of the comments section or keep them phrased in a spoiler free way. Let's jump in. These are going to be questions on technical aspects of the content pacing within Endwalker moving forward. As I quote things, keep in mind that some of these interviews were shared. So like Asmongold is really that I watched it on Asmongold, but it had Rich involved. Whoops was alternating questions with Drac. Mistech was alternating with Larry. I don't know who the different press outlets were sharing with. So just keep that in mind where I label these. These are for my own notes, my poor typing. And I will get started here with MMORPG.com saying for the upcoming year, expansion with the new story promise ahead, what's going on with the pacing of the patches? Will the pacing continue? Historically, for anybody new that is not aware of how the pacing actually works in this game, the content releases for a patch, and then we have a half patch and a full patch. They are roughly, I think, 16 weeks apart. It's historically a 2-year cycle for an expansion, and during an expansion, we get a 0.0, a 0.5, a 0.1. I get a 0.05, and then we get a 0.1, 0.15, 0.2, 0.25, and so on, all the way through 0.55. We actually also, in addition to that, it's not only a numbering system, but we actually know roughly what is in each of those patches. So we know what we get with a 0.1. We know what we get with a 0.55. And so we are immensely informed on the basic framework of how an expansion works, and the implementation and anything additional is where we get surprised with the game. Will that continue moving forward is this question, and it gets a pretty big answer because we'd expect it to say, we're consistent. Why would you even ask that? And instead, Yoshi P says, I really can't say one way or another at this point. I don't think we would ever come to a point where we look at a major patch update cadence and take like 3.5 months of our current update schedule and change it to something crazy like half a year, right? What MMO in their right mind would go like 200 days after an expansion and then release a patch? I don't think we'd ever do that. So he says, I don't think we'd ever come to a point where we would look at major patch update cadence and say, okay, we're at 3.5 months now. Let's kick it out to half a year. We're not going to do that. So don't worry, but we'll address it looking forward. We'll address it. And so they may adjust, but this was one of the several questions throughout the interviews where, while Yoshi P respects WoW as a peer, there was a little bit of shade thrown. I don't think we'd ever be the kind of game that would go from consistently releasing content to our players to going like 200 days. I don't think we would do that. That just doesn't seem like this. I don't know that that's like my thing. I don't know that disappointing people is my thing. And so there was a little bit of there's a confidence, there's a cockiness in some of his answers this time that I haven't seen in coverage of Yoshi P in the past. There's a swagger where he feels good. He knows he's doing good. There is a question, I don't know, I think I have it. I think it's from one of these interviews where he was, so I'll get to it in one of these, where he was asked where kind of the game falls in Square Enix. And he effectively responded with, if there's another studio inside Square Enix that can make as much money as Final Fantasy XIV, I'd love to see that. I mean, like, straight up, just, yeah. I mean, go ahead and try. Do it. I dare you. And so there is a swagger that he has going into Endwalker that I have not seen in past coverage. We've been covering this game for about 5 years. Fusion over on Aetheryte Radio said he has been covering this game since 1.0. Wow, Brian's been covering this game since 1.0. They've never seen this swagger, and they both noted it as well. I do think there's just something different going on here than we've ever had in the past. And so that's really exciting to see, because I don't think he'd be doing that if he didn't know something. Now, Ms. Tech over at MTQ Capture asks, would the dev team ever consider delaying a Savage tier by a week for patch content, similar to the delay at the start of an expansion? The way Savage works, for anybody new coming in from WoW that's used to getting a mythic copy of every raid, is we have raids in this game and we have trials. Trials turn into extremes, which are kind of your heroic difficulty. Raids turn into savages, which I guess is our mythic difficulty. They're not exactly one-to-one really at all. I'm sure people in chat will already be sounding off like, why would you say that? And then ultimates are something that we only get a handful of. We've only gotten 3 ever. We're getting a 4th one with 6.0, and there have been questions of, are we getting another one? And those live forever. They are effectively always in a time-locking state. They never, ever, ever, you can't just go in and one-shot them now that we're level 90. They are locked away and protected, and they only drop cosmetic weapons. So when you see glowing weapons in the game, those are ultimate weapons. So the question here is, would we ever delay it? Our first Savage tier comes with the launch of each expansion, and effectively what we do with Endwalker is 6.0 will drop. We will have the raid will drop in a couple weeks, and right around Christmas, and the Savage raid will drop at the start of the year, 4 weeks. And the reason for that is that locks away the gear grind, that locks away the weekly resets from really kicking in until people have had 4 weeks to enjoy all of this. That gives people plenty of time. But when we get to 6.2 and 6.4, the other 2 sets of raids, we get 4 raid bosses, all as part of a series. The series is labeled as a initial. So the series was called Eden in Shadowbringers, and so we used an E, and then we number the fights, 1 through 4, 5 through 8, 9 through 12, and then S for Savage. And so the final tier that released in December 8th of 2020, because content has been delayed for every game, Endwalker included, so it's been a long time since we've gotten a new Savage, was E 9 through 12 S, and so that is how that is numbered. The new raid series is called Pandemonium. So we will get P1 through 4 2 weeks after the official launch of Endwalker, December 7th, and we will get P1 through 4S early in January, 4 weeks after the December 7th launch date. But when 6.2 drops in 6.4, there is not that same delay. And so people that want to enjoy the story content, maybe they're interested in other things that are released around those patches. Maybe they like relic content, or they like, whatever it is. If there's a new deep dungeon, whatever it may be, if it gets updated on an even-numbered patch, even-numbered patches are more Savage-based, odd-numbered patches are more casual-based. That's where we get our 24-mans that do not have a hard mode tied to them. Why would we ever delay that? Okay? So that is why she's asking that. Ms. Tech is a top-end player, and she is aware of this. And so would we ever consider delaying? And off of the heels of the very previous question, Yoshi B says, well, I expected him to go, no, by the time we look at how long patch cycles are, we just really can't move stuff like that because there's too many moving parts because we deliver patches consistently. So if we delay something, it delays everything. We can't do that. We can't kick something out because it'll ripple. And instead he said, well, I can't say anything except that we are looking at what is feasible ever since Shadowbringers. And once we decide moving forward, we hope that that will match and align with what we've been receiving in feedback, what's been told to us. And we are looking into it, but looking into it is that soon. Please look forward to it. Those are universal phrases for, yeah, okay. And maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. But he said, I would say looking into it, and I want you to know that I mean looking into it positively. He noted that his own phrase needs to be a little more oomph on that. So that's a big deal. Okay. So we could see the Savage get slowed down, which I think would be really good for Savage players that also like other content too. Now the next one is from Fanbyte, and it's how the team handles the pressures of developing something with such a large scope. This game is massive. It's massive. There are a lot of versions. If you've watched Pint's video, there's a lot of versions of Endgame here. And he said, honestly, we're just too busy and we don't really have time to stop and reflect on how much is on our plate. The team has tried to create content that feels fun, and that it's fun to do and to play as it's being made, not just maintain the usual level of quality, but also improve our quality as we go. And that we want you to know that the word count for Endwalker's script and dialogue is 1.5 times larger than that of the last expansion. This is where I got that number. The Endwalker is going to be 30% longer than previous expansions, longer than a typical single-player RPG, but it's going to have 50% more words. The reason I think we can fit 50% more words into 1.3 times the length is that we now have NPCs talking to us as we move through the zones. That's my guess, but I haven't been an Endwalker yet, and if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe you have. Perhaps one of the biggest ways in which the team members share their creative visions and the speed and quality and harmony in which it becomes fully realized is that once we start piecing those different elements together, each kind of artist gets to work on their own. And so we do admit that sometimes as a result, it can feel a little bit off sometimes because there's too many things running parallel. And so he is aware that that is the size of this game has pros and cons. But interesting to kind of hear them talk about it. They've gone into it. They've had interviews in the past where they've had people like their internal people who manage the schedules and stuff come on. And it's crazy how much they take on. The next one is from the Asmongold and Rich interview. And it says, how do you balance time sync versus ease of access and playing solo versus playing multiplayer? Now, Yoshipi is a heavy MMO gamer. And he says that, like Asmongold, he really likes a lot of hardcore content. If streaming had been available at the time, he would not have taken an office job, and he would have wanted to be a streamer like Asmon and Rich. While he was playing a lot, he would meet other players who just come in and just chat or just tour around. And he's aware that MMOs are a shared world. Maybe one day he thinks that he'll get stronger and better. And he'll be able to do stuff like that, but the vocal people tend to be the hardcore players, and the wider community is the ones who support the world. And so when you talk about how do you balance it, he wants to provide for both groups, the vocal hardcore and the quiet casuals. With 14, we have these large patch updates, and so every odd patch tends to be more casual, which is what I was just talking about, and every even tends to be the more hardcore and high-end. While we do have sometimes something will release alongside casual content, such as 6.1 getting an ultimate, that's how they balance that cadence with the different types of players, as we have odd-numbered patches and even-numbered patches. So if you only like one of those patches, you have a long time to pace it out, and some people do take breaks, and he encourages them to do so. And then he said, because of this, if in between even-numbered patches, you want to go to do something like WoW, and raid during the odd-numbered patches, then he encourages you to do that. Hardcore content is great. Go take breaks. Go play something else. He knows you'll be back. No big deal. Now, Whoops is a top-end raider here that a lot of people associate with kind of casual, very, very entertaining content, but a very talented player. And so Whoops asks, a lot of older mechanics get skipped in scaled content. Any of you that have ever done Alliance Raid Roulette, this is by far the biggest thing of this, outside of like maybe the three big story dungeons towards the end of ARR, the trial that just falls over, as well as Castrum and Praetorium, the two very long non-skippable cutscene dungeons. And Whoops is noting this, and it kind of takes something away from the game. So when people are just standing there, and he asks, is the stat squish, we're dropping to 20% of our stats, is that going to change that at all? Now, he said that it definitely is something that will be affected by the scale down. The scale down, they said, should feel unaffected for Endwalker, but looking back, they are aware that it will probably affect things like Alliance raids, and that rather than fix that, they are actually hoping that elements that people skipped will come down and will be in a more appropriate balance of keeping the content approachable but actually respecting mechanics. He is aware that players who are used to just blindly running through old alliance raids and skipping and ignoring all the mechanics, where there's whole groups of players who I don't even think know how these old fights work. He's aware that there are players that are used to this old way of doing things might complain. It would be great if they would leave their feedback on the forums. They're looking for feedback. Sometimes I hear people, they're like, yeah, so I was complaining on my Discord the other day and they didn't even change it. Well, how could they hear you? Go complain somewhere Square Enix can hear you. And he said Alliance Roulettes might, as a result, take more time. And the team, as a result of that, will be looking into more rewards, drops from that content to make sure that that lines up. Now, Whoops follows this up. These were interjected with questions from Drac. Drac being another top-end raider, so a lot of very technical questions as well, heavily influenced on Monk, but honestly have impacts well beyond Monk. And says, do you have plans to reward running old content? You know, they've added Unreals this time around. What about something like running content minimum item level? Could there be a reward for that? You know, a title, something, just anything. And Yoshpi says they're really torn about that. He likes that at minimum item level you experience it closer to what it was, and he's been excited to hear that players are off doing stuff like that. However, he does not want to put a reward behind something like that that would make people suddenly feel that they have to do content like this. Nothing in 14 beyond clearing the MSQ, and you can press escape the whole way, is required. It's one of the biggest differences between this and WoW, is WoW will say, if you want to raid this week, you also need to do your Beast Tribes, you need to run 10 levels of Palace of the Dead, you need to run at least 25 roulettes, you'll also have to run hard mode roulettes, and you're going to have to go out and clear 16 fates and clear any 5 parts of your challenge log. What does that have to do with raiding? Well, but if you don't do all that, how are you going to be good at running really difficult group content? What does any of that have to do with big group content? Nothing. If I liked that stuff, I would do that stuff. Okay. And if I don't want to do that stuff. Okay. Well, we've made it mandatory for both groups of people, so screw off, I guess. So he does consistently get concerned that anything would suddenly feel required. He has, however, thought about making content like that have something that is just titles or just glamour. But his fear with coming out and announcing something like that being added is that he is afraid that if they spend time on that, people will think, the devs don't even want to make new stuff for this game. They just want players looking at old content. And so they're afraid of going back and supporting old content too fervently, because we would then be like, well, the reason we didn't get an ultimate is because they're too busy making us run old minimum item levels. Do your jobs. He didn't use that tone. I did. But he did say that questions like this provide nice hints and show interest in things that they can go back and look to explore. So that's really, really good. I can understand why he feels that way. I appreciate how safeguarded he is against it, as long as the safeguard doesn't mean we're never, ever going to deal with it. But this is all, in my mind, what tells us that they are looking out at the long-term health of the game. This plus announcements like the additional data center in the Oceanic region, which is incredibly expensive. This, going in and paying streamers to come over from WoW and give it a shot, and then them sticking around. This, having a fan fest, having the Fat Black Chocobo event, invest with creators, having, all of these additional support and continuing to do collab things in-game, bringing back things, addressing long-time content that they could have just ignored if they wanted the game to end, like PvP. I think these are all signs that they are looking at the pace that they release content, what makes it into content, what does not, when it gets here, and they are investing in the long-term health of this game because they want this game to be healthy long-term, which I think going into an expansion that at the time of this recording has not yet released and is dropping in 9 hours and 35 minutes. I think it's really nice to know that they've called that a finale, and they have worked extra hard to make sure that we do not hear the word finale and focus too much on the emphasis of the word final. The game will continue. The story needs to end while it can really mean something and be on a good note so it can give way to a new and fresh story. But the game, what we invest in, the community, and the content that we built around our character, that has a long life in front of it, and they are not anywhere close to done.